Today I'm talking to the founder of Pressoir.wine and La Paulée, Danielle Johnnes, who is also wine consultant to Chef Daniel Boulud and an importer of French wines. We feature the Pressoir wine classes on the marketplace at Coravin.com. Welcome, Daniel. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. Nice to see
Excellent.
you.
Nice to see you too. So, can you tell me a little bit about the history of La Paulée in Burgundy and how that shaped the first event that you held in New York?
Absolutely. La Palais is a festival that's a traditional Burgundian festival. La Palais is really a ceremony that occurs at every domain in Burgundy and beyond. Some regions of France have a different name for it, but in Burgundy, they call it La Palais. And La Palais is a celebration that every winery has at the end of harvest. It takes place, well, harvest is usually in September. Global warming, it's been earlier, but it's usually in September. So when the final grapes are picked and brought in and put in vats to start fermenting, the domain gathers the workers and the family of the domain and they celebrate. And that's called their Paulée. The Paulée became a larger celebration in the 20s with the Count Jules Lafont, who was a very fine gentleman and winemaker in the village of Meursault. And you have to remember, in the 20s, Burgundy wasn't as popular as it is today. They were really struggling to sell their wines. So, as a marketing technique, they started these several large promotional celebrations in Burgundy. One of which was La Paulée de Meursault, where Jules Lafont would invite all the winemakers from the village of Meursault to gather together and celebrate together. So over the years, this was 1923 or 24, and over the years, it just grew to this very large wine celebration that takes place the third Monday of November every year. Now, the great grandson of Jules Lafont is a good friend of mine, Dominique Lafont, who now currently runs the Domaine des Comtes Lafont, and invited me to the Paulée de Meursault one year, probably about I don't know, in the late 80s or early 90s. And I was so taken aback by just the spirit of the event. I said, this is something that I have to try to recreate in New York and in the United States. Because what it is the winemakers from the village gather with their family, with their friends. They bring bottles from their cellar and they sit down at a table, a long banquet table with 40, 50, 60 people seated at it. And in Meursault, there are about 700 people in the room. So you have multiple tables. And they start serving the food, and the guests get up from the table with their bottles and pour it to their neighbors and friends in the room. And it becomes this huge celebration of walking around the room, pouring wine for everybody. And I just felt that that's really the spirit of wine. It's being able to share it with people and talk about it and not get geeky about it, but just have it with food, have it with friends. And that was the inspiration for me. So that's the history of the event, and that's the origin of my event here in New York, that I subsequently took to San Francisco, and we did a small one in Aspen, Colorado, and we've grown over the last 20 years or so to kind of transmit this spirit. We talk about wine. There's an educational component to it, but most importantly, it's the culture of wine and cuisine, and sharing it with people, and that side of the enjoyment of wine that is so important to me.
Yeah, and that sort of event sounds like a fantasy right now, doesn't it?
Oh,
I'm sure you miss it incredibly, no?
it almost makes you want to cry
I
because
know it must your heart
it's
must be like
well, I mean, 1 year ago exactly is when we were gearing up for the 20th anniversary celebration of La Paulée.
you know.
And the whole event was sold out very quickly. We had hundreds of people. There's all said and done between the various events. There were well over 1,000, 1,500 people who attended it, and 50 winemakers from Burgundy and 80 sommeliers from across the world. And all these people and maybe 20 chefs all coming together. And so when I think about it this year, approaching the 1 year anniversary, I'm calling it the 1 year anniversary of the 20th anniversary.
Right.
It really, it's really very emotional.
Yeah.
You know, Because I mean, this is what we're all missing. And here we are looking at each other on a screen. And it's great to see you, and it's great to see people that we talk to through our activities on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that contact that's still missing.
No, it doesn't replace the in-person contact. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So it was a 20th year anniversary. In what ways have the events evolved over the years?
Well, when we started, when I came back from Burgundy with this great desire and inspiration to try to do it here, I launched it in a very small scale. I didn't even call it the Paulée de New York at the time. We did a couple of wine dinners with some of my Burgundy friends, and gradually grew. And they started to become very famous and solicited to visit their importers or clients all over the world. And they said, Daniel, if we're going to come back, you have to do something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, okay, I like the challenge. Let's do something bigger. Let's do La Paulée de New York. And so the first official Paulée was in the year 2000, and we had 12 winemakers. And we just did a 1 day of tastings during the afternoon of a current vintage. I guess the time would have been 1998, or maybe we were showing the 97. And then a gala dinner in the evening. So the way it's evolved over the years, to answer your question, is that we added on to that additional tastings, and additional days of tastings and different kinds of events and seminars and lunches and dinners, and just built on it so we could tap into different themes of Burgundy, talk about vintages, talk about viticulture, talk about a next generation. Because we want to really appeal to young people who are interested in wine, but maybe intimidated by Burgundy.
Mm-hmm.
So we spent a lot of time over the last years in really developing that side of the program, all while still showcasing some of the most famous winemakers of Burgundy.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So how did the business have to transform during the pandemic? I mean, obviously it's completely upended, but what have you been able to do?
Yeah, I guess, I don't know, there must be an expression for this, but out of tragedy grows opportunity.
Sure.
We didn't just fold up and go away and stop doing what we're doing. We found another way to do what we're doing. So we very quickly started having Zoom interviews. I had never heard of Zoom. I'm one of
many people. I've never done Zoom before. Yeah.
Many millions of people. I just wish that somebody told me to buy some stock in it.
No kidding.
But so we very early on were certainly one of the first to start these Zoom sessions with winemakers. And that led to a series of these sessions, and it also led to this development of what we call Pressoir, which Pressoir is just a platform by which we can communicate and host these different programs, whether they be interviews or a wine club, Pressoir Wine Club. We have quite a few members, seller consultation, organizing trips. Of course, trips wasn't part of it after the pandemic, but it became this platform for us. So we used that to do these Zoom sessions, and we found that people were really interested in it. And our big sponsor, American Express, and our fine friends at Coravin believed in us and helped support us in what we were doing, and really reached a greater audience. Because one of the things we learned through the pandemic, I guess, is that you're stronger together. You're stronger with your partners. You're stronger with your friends. You reach different demographics, but you have a common goal.
Yep.
And I think that through Coravin and others, we've been really able to cobble together a very vibrant business.
Yeah.
So it's great.
Absolutely.
The pandemic hasn't been great, but there are aspects to it. And somebody was asking me yesterday, and I said, the other good part is I can park almost wherever I want in New York.
Silver linings. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Now, do you have any tips for first-time virtual tasting participants? I've done some virtual tastings. I've been blown away by how engaging and wonderful they are. Um, how do you think people should engage? And, what are the best settings for that?
Yeah, that's great. It's a great question because, certainly when we started, we just started doing it. And then we learned through it. We learned
Mhm.
how to edit and record content to boost and support what we were talking about, things like that. But for the guest who's attending, I think a really good tip is to do some research about the topic before joining.
Mhm.
Um, it just makes it a richer experience. Just like when you go to an art museum and you know a little something about the painting or the artist beforehand, it makes it that much richer. So I would say do a little research. Have a good glass, have some wine to taste that accompanies the topic. Usually we recommend a wine, but if you don't want to go out and buy it or can't find it,
Mhm.
then take a similar type of wine and try to relate to what we're talking about. So have a good glass, prep the wine, have it at the right temperature, take the time to do that, maybe decant it. Know that the session is being recorded and maybe make notes at what point during the discussion an interesting topic was
Mm.
touched on that you could revisit at a later date
Yep,
and really build an archive over it. So
absolutely.
those are a few useful tips, I think.
Definitely. Do you see this? Do you think it's here to stay, the virtual tastings? Do you think it's going to be an industry standard for years to come?
Well, I know for us, yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. I think it is. I think for us, it's very. We've learned so much. We found that it's such a useful tool because there are no walls,
Right.
no barriers, and we've had people join us from Australia. We've had people get up in the middle of the night just to get get onto our
Incredible.
time zone and be able to log in. You can see how they look like they just got
Yeah.
out of bed, but but they wanted to join. So it is something that we're not going to do exclusively, but it's something that'll be a layover on top of our in-person events, which we're
Yeah.
very, very anxious to get back to.
Yeah, it's nice to have in your back pocket for sure. Not everybody can travel, and I think it's definitely a silver lining of the wine industry for sure.
Yeah.
Um, what um, what are you most looking forward to when travel and events do return?
Hugging.
Hugging people. Yeah, yeah. No.
Yeah. Oh, I
Yes.
miss that so much.
Yeah, I know human contact. It's
Oh,
wild.
it's going to
Um,
be funny to see how people react.
yeah.
I'm not going to force myself on anyone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think everybody's going to be very awkward to
Yeah,
start.
it's going to be funny. I don't know about shaking hands. I mean,
I
in the
know.
past year, some people have been a little brazen about it and reached out their hand to me
Oh,
and
really?
you feel funny, but you just wash your hand afterwards.
Yeah, yeah.
But the
Um,
French, because so much of my
oh, it's kissing.
business and relationships are with the French, and they're not cheek kissing now,
Right,
and who knows if they'll go back to it. Can you
right.
imagine?
It's bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there'll be things. I have little kids, and it'll be interesting to tell them. They're not going to remember any of this, but to tell them like what it was like before COVID. Who knows? Like they might be using hand sanitizer for the rest of
Yeah.
their, you know, uh,
I guess it's
time in
not such a
school.
bad thing.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I missed that.
Yeah.
But yeah, was there
Oh,
another
just
part to the question?
what are you most looking forward to when travel returns?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you've traveled a little bit, so
Well, just that one
yeah,
trip. That was
yeah,
the one trip, and it was a 3 week trip, so it was a long time, and it was absolutely. Um, Again, this was a very emotional experience because for the first time I was back in cellars tasting. I was
right,
back in the vineyard. I was back with my friends in Burgundy, and we all realize how important that is.
right.
That this is a nice substitute, being able to do it online and talk and
Mhm,
maybe have samples sent to you. But it's that exchange,
mhm.
not just like the personal, the human contact, but the exchange. It's a totally different energy when you're in front of somebody tasting and talking and exchanging ideas and impressions. So
Absolutely.
that's something that I think I'm definitely looking forward to more of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what advice do you have for young sommeliers or wine professionals that are just starting out?
I love that question. Well, right now the restaurant industry is devastated. It's coming back in New York. It's opened from 25 to 35%, and soon more. But for people who are interested in getting into the wine profession, I've been saying this for years, but it almost became irrelevant, over the last decade. My advice is learn how to be a good busboy or bus girl. I don't know what the politically correct
Sure,
term is
sure, sure.
anymore, but a busser, a
Mhm.
good busser. Learn how to take care of the guests. Become a busser. Become a waiter. Understand what's happening in the dining room, what the rhythm of the dining room is, of the
Mm,
dining experience, what
yes.
hospitality means. How do you take care of a guest? How do you make them happy? How do you enhance their experience? I would say, maybe over the last decade, where there's been such interest and demand for wine professionals in the dining room, you find a lot of people wanting to get a certification and learn about wine and all the great varieties and treatments and this and that.
Hmm.
And they'd come and interview with me for a position. And I'd say, well, what is your, epiphany wine, or what is your
Hmm.
greatest experience in the dining room? And sometimes they're lost because they've been
Hmm.
so hung up with the education.
Right.
You
Not
have to
not
learn,
the practical experience is so
right.
important.
You have to learn, you have to be able to look at a table and know what's happening on the table, and not just knowing the glass is almost
Hmm.
empty, so you need to top it up. You have to look at the water glass, you have to look at the plates, you have to look at the body language, you have
Hmm.
to know when it's okay to go to the table and not interrupt. There are all those little like nuances that are so
Right.
important to good service.
Absolutely. Um, so our company mission at Coravin is to change the way the world experiences wine. What is your favorite wine experience or a favorite wine experience? Because I know you've had many.
I'm one of the very, very lucky people. There are a number of very lucky people
Yeah.
and wine has become such a big part of the dining experience, that you have changed the world. Coravin has changed the world because Coravin has enabled people to really learn about wine and not feel this pressure that they're opening a bottle and they have to drink the whole thing, or if you open another bottle, then what are you going to do with it? It's enabled people to really learn and enjoy and have multiple wines during a meal. This is what's been a revelation for me, since learning about Coravin and Greg and everything you do. And I don't know how many Coravins I have in my shelf right now, but I'm never.
I'm very curious. How many do you have?
So I think I have six, but I share them, and sometimes I give them
Right.
away. So sometimes I need to get a new one. But my mission, if you like, is to get people to enjoy wine without the stigma of their palate, but worrying about what people think about their palate, and
Mm,
them worrying about whether they're going to be judged by what they think is good. So often people say, "Is this wine any good?"
right.
And I say, well, you're tasting it. You just tell me your impressions. And I really want people to trust their palate.
Hmm.
And I do my best to get people to debunk the myth of uh, vintage, that
Mm,
it's not the vintage, that wine is for pleasure and you shouldn't be just drinking wine because it has a certain score, or, the vintage has a certain score.
right.
So my what I really like to achieve in talking to people and communicating with people is that relax, try to enjoy wine for all the experiences that it offers, because there's so many influences on the experiences, so many contexts of it. Try to think of it of, a wine during a certain season, whether
Hmm.
it be summer, hot weather, or cold weather, the people you're with. Are there a lot of people? Are there few people? Try to take all that into context and think about it when you serve the wine. But most importantly is just to don't think about the Well, don't think about the price of wine. It's hard not to these days. Wine can be so expensive, but there's so many great wines at great prices.
Mhm.
I like to recommend wines that overachieve. In other words, deliver more than what you expect. And that's like the greatest experience of all. It's when you taste a wine with modest expectations, saying, "Oh yeah, I think this is going to be pretty good," and then it's like, "Wow,
Yeah.
this is great." And then, "Oh, I only paid $20 for this. This is phenomenal."
Yeah.
That's the great experience.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. That's always great. And then you make sure that you buy at least a case of it,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that happened to me the other night with well, I gotta say, the problem with the quarter, it's not a problem, it's my problem. Often I'll sit down to dinner with a bottle of wine and my wife,
Mhm.
and I'll Coravin, and I'll say, look, let's just have a couple of glasses tonight.
Mhm.
And then the wine's so good, I'm
Mhm.
the hell am I doing with this Coravin here? Let's pull the cork.
Ah,
But it's a
we'll
starting
edit this out.
point.
We'll edit this out. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's a good point. I understand where you're coming from.
No, but the point to follow up on that is it allows me, and this happened the other night, it allows me to taste a wine, start with the wine. It kind of opens the gates to wine enjoyment. And then I'll say, you know what? This is not right for this dish, or
Right.
I think this needs a little bit more time, or it's not the right temperature or something. Let's open something else. So
Yep.
then I'll carve in something else. And the one that I started goes back into the fridge or the cellar.
Right. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Um, you made me think of another question. What do you think the next hot wine region is that people are going to be talking about 2 years from now? Because I know there's
Oh.
countries that are coming out of the gate with interesting wine, whether climate change has a lot to do with it. What do you think's on the horizon right now?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I think that it's like the greatest time for wine consumers
Yeah.
because there's so many great wines made all over the world. It would be maybe naive for me to point out just one country because there are so many countries that are turning out great wines. Now, I'm a Francophile. My expertise is in France, especially Burgundy. So if I were to talk about, well, I'll just start with Burgundy. I think the thing to look for in Burgundy are some of the more remote appellations,
Mhm.
such as the Haute Côte de Beaune or the Haute Côte de Nuit, some of the more removed areas of the appellations lesser known, like Marcenay or Fissin and Marange,
Right.
things like that. Now, to go beyond Burgundy, because I don't want to just box myself in there, I think that there's like every region of France has winemakers that are dedicated to producing great wine, which is not the case. It has not always been the case. There's some areas of France that were into mass production, industrial production, because there was a demand for it. But there's a lesser demand of quantity today uh, as compared to quality. People look for quality wines.
Yeah.
And then you go to the old world regions such as Spain, Italy, Portugal.
Mhm.
I think Portugal is a real area of discovery for not just not port, but the dry wines
I
of the
agree.
Douro and other regions of Portugal. It's fantastic stuff. And regions of Italy that aren't the most commonly thought of, Tuscany and Piedmont, of course. But then you go to regions like Calabria and Sicily, some
Yep.
spectacular wines, great value.
Yep.
And then um, the New World, oh, and also Eastern Europe, also, which is a very old wine producing area. But when you go to areas, Croatia,
Mhm.
and there's just so many interesting wines and interesting grape varieties. But the New World, we always thought of the New World as maybe Australia and the United States and California specifically, and then of course Oregon is a huge
Right.
producer of wine now. Every state in the country produces wine. New York State.
Mhm.
I can't pick out one region,
Mhm.
but what I can say is that there are opportunities everywhere.
Yeah. There was a recent article I was reading about wine out of Bolivia and Norway. Countries that it was either in the Spectator or Wine Enthusiast, but
Yeah,
that was new to me. But who knows? In
yeah.
5 to 10 years. I mean, Land is cheaper there, right?
Well, it's cheaper, and they really can't command the same prices for the wine
Right.
as historic traditional regions such as Bordeaux or Burgundy.
Right.
And I think that's the key. I think that's what I encourage people to try wines from different areas, because there is such quality and interest all over the world in viticulture
Hmm.
and organic and biodynamic viticulture in other areas, that you don't have to pay a fortune for really good quality wine.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love discovering a good value wine that you're not paying an arm and a leg for.
Yeah, it makes it taste that much better.
Yeah, well, you've certainly created an inclusive worldwide community, and despite the pandemic, or in spite of the pandemic, you've been able to grow that community, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I like people. I just miss them.
no kidding. Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for taking the time today. And everybody should check out lapaulet.com, as well as the Pressoir.wine, which is also available on the marketplace at Coravin.com. Thank you
Yeah,
again,
thank you.
Daniel.
Thank you for all you're doing, and your whole team is fantastic. We really enjoy working with you.
Oh, likewise.